Across the globe, city streets pulsed with protest. From the first light of morning to late into the night, people poured out of their homes and workplaces, drawn together by a shared sense of urgency and outrage. From Rome to Istanbul to Buenos Aires, thousands gathered, united in outrage over the Israeli military's interception of a humanitarian flotilla bound for Gaza. The news spread rapidly, igniting a wave of demonstrations that spanned continents and cultures. Signs waved, chants echoed, and flags flew. This was not a distant political squabble, but a deeply personal response to a dramatic event at sea. For many, the flotilla's mission represented hope, and its interception felt like a direct blow to the values they cherished. In Italy, a national general strike paralyzed cities, while in Turkey, crowds rallied outside embassies, their voices condemning what they saw as aggression. The sense of injustice was palpable, echoing through empty streets and packed squares alike. The protests were a vivid reminder. A single act in the Mediterranean could spark global action. The world's attention was fixed on Gaza, but the ripples of outrage reached far beyond. Students, union workers, activists, and ordinary citizens all felt compelled to stand up. People from all walks of life, young and old, joined together, their differences set aside for a common cause. Images of water cannons and silenced live streams fueled their anger. Attempts to suppress the protests only seemed to strengthen the resolve of those in the streets, as footage and stories spread rapidly online. For many, the flotilla symbolized hope and humanitarianism. Its violent interception felt like an attack on those ideals. The ships had carried not just aid, but the aspirations of people worldwide who believed in justice and relief for Gaza. The protests transcended borders, turning the Gaza blockade into a worldwide debate about human rights and international responsibility. In city after city, the call for justice grew louder, echoing across languages and cultures. Faces in the crowd demanded accountability, not just for an event, but for a policy. Their voices called for change, for recognition, and for an end to what they saw as collective punishment. They stood in solidarity with the flotilla, and by extension with Gaza, sending a clear message: silence was not an option. Around the world, people insisted that their leaders listen and act. The world was not just watching, it was marching. In that moment, the streets became a stage for global conscience, and the call for justice could not be ignored. The Global Sumud Flotilla was more than a convoy. It was a statement of resilience, a symbol of hope in the face of adversity. It represented a collective refusal to accept injustice, and a determination to stand in solidarity with those under siege. Named for the Arabic word meaning steadfastness, the flotilla embodied the spirit of unwavering resistance. It was the largest and most ambitious attempt yet to break Gaza's blockade, drawing attention from around the globe. Over 40 vessels, each painted with messages of peace and solidarity, set sail from European ports. They were loaded with desperately needed aid, medical supplies, food, and essential goods, destined for the people of Gaza. The mission was clear: deliver supplies directly to Gaza and challenge the legality and morality of the ongoing naval blockade, which had isolated an entire population for years. On board were doctors, lawyers, politicians, students, and activists from over 40 countries. They were united by a shared belief that the siege was not just a regional crisis, but a global failure of humanity and justice. They knew the risks. Previous flotillas had faced force, intimidation, and even violence, but hoped that their sheer numbers and the spotlight of international attention would make a difference this time. Months of grassroots fundraising, tireless organizing, and volunteer work made the mission possible. Communities across continents rallied together, raising both funds and awareness. This was a citizen-led effort, powered by ordinary people, teachers, nurses, students, and retirees, determined to act where governments had failed or remained silent. As the ships sailed, they carried not just aid, but the hopes, dreams, and solidarity of supporters worldwide, all watching and waiting for news. The flotilla was a bold act of nonviolent resistance, aiming to force the world to confront Gaza's suffering and to remind us all of the power of collective action in the pursuit of justice. The confrontation unfolded in international waters, far from any coastline, under the watchful eyes of the world's media and international observers. Between October 1st and 3rd, 2025, Israeli forces launched Operation Horizon Shield, a meticulously planned mission to intercept and halt the flotilla's progress toward Gaza. Heavily armed naval vessels surrounded the fleet, eventually boarding the final ship, the Marinette, more than 40 nautical miles from Gaza, well outside Israeli territorial waters, in a move that drew immediate international scrutiny. Communications were jammed, live streams abruptly cut, and activists were drenched by powerful water cannons and foul-smelling skunk water, leaving them isolated and unable to broadcast their ordeal. The flotilla's peaceful mission, intended to deliver humanitarian aid and challenge the blockade, was met with overwhelming military force and a show of zero tolerance. Israel framed the operation as a necessary act to enforce a legal blockade, labeling the activists as provocateurs, and in some cases, even as potential terrorists. The IDF claimed that minimal violence was used and offered to deliver the aid via established land crossings, an offer the flotilla organizers firmly rejected, insisting on their right to reach Gaza by sea. Hundreds of activists, many of them from countries around the world, were detained and transported to the port of Ashdod for processing and eventual deportation. While Israeli officials insisted that all detainees were safe and treated according to international standards, for the activists, the experience felt more like abduction than lawful detention. The interception ignited a global firestorm, sparking protests, diplomatic tensions, and urgent questions about the legality of the blockade and the broader issue of human rights at sea. The detainee list included global icons, ensuring the world's attention. Greta Thunberg's presence linked climate justice to human rights, her detention sparking headlines and calls for action. Nkosi Zwelivelile Mandela, Nelson Mandela's grandson, drew powerful parallels between apartheid and the Palestinian struggle. Elected officials like Ada Colau, Rima Hassan, and Irish Senator Chris Andrews risked their careers to join the mission. Reports from detention described hunger strikes and denial of legal counsel, with activists smuggling out messages of protest. Their testimonies, amplified by fame, transformed the incident into a gripping human drama. The world saw not just a naval standoff, but a story of defiance, solidarity, and the cost of standing up for Gaza. The flotilla's high-profile passengers made silence impossible. Among those detained were over 20 foreign journalists, there to document the flotilla's journey. Treated as activists, they were arrested, their equipment seized, and held in Ashdod. Press freedom groups condemned the move as a grave violation of the right to report. Reporters Without Borders called it censorship on the high seas, warning it set a dangerous precedent. The arrests came amid a deadly period for journalists in the region, with over 200 killed in Gaza since 2023. Human rights groups accused Israel of creating an information blackout, making independent reporting nearly impossible. The message was clear: covering this story meant risking detention. The world was left with only the official narrative until the journalists could speak for themselves. The incident raised urgent questions about press freedom in conflict zones. News of the interception sparked immediate massive protests worldwide. In Italy, a general strike halted cities. In Istanbul, crowds denounced the raid as terrorism. Demonstrations erupted from Karachi to Buenos Aires, uniting people across continents in outrage. Protesters demanded the release of detainees, diplomatic action, and an end to the Gaza blockade. Images of children waving Palestinian flags and banners reading "Humanity is not a provocation" flooded social media. Hashtags like "Free the Flotilla" trended globally, amplifying the movement. Digital activism and street protests merged, keeping the flotilla's story in the headlines. The world's anger was impossible to ignore. The flotilla's interception triggered a diplomatic crisis. Colombia expelled Israeli diplomats and canceled a trade deal, calling the raid an international crime. South Africa and Turkey condemned the operation, labeling it terrorism and demanding detainees' release. European governments issued coordinated calls for transparency and swift deportation, pressured by the presence of their own officials among the detained. International bodies like the UN and Amnesty International called the raid illegal and intimidating. Legal experts argued the seizure of civilian vessels in international waters violated international law. The incident deepened divides between the global South and Western powers, isolating Israel diplomatically. The world's response gave protesters' demands new weight. To understand the flotilla, you must understand Gaza's reality. Under blockade since 2007, Gaza's economy is shattered, with shortages of food, water, and medicine. The 2023 war left over 66,000 dead, and infrastructure in ruins, creating a humanitarian catastrophe. Activists argued that official aid channels, controlled by Israel, were too slow and legitimized the blockade. The flotilla aimed to deliver direct relief and challenge the siege itself. Previous attempts, like the 2010 Mavi Marmara, ended in violence, but the need for action remained urgent. The mission was a high-stakes gamble, born of frustration with years of stalemate. The world's attention, activists believed, had to be forced back onto Gaza's suffering. The Global Sumud Flotilla condensed a complex conflict into a single, dramatic event. Civilian boats carrying aid and activists, stopped by military force, created a powerful moral narrative. High-profile detainees drew in new audiences, making the story impossible to ignore. The incident became a focal point for debates on Gaza, international law, and the right to protest. The interception in international waters raised alarms about state overreach and set a dangerous precedent. The world watched, seeing the flotilla as a test of humanitarian principles and the power of civil disobedience. Ongoing protests and diplomatic battles became part of a larger struggle over global responsibility. The question remained, in times of crisis, what do we owe each other?